commercialization of competitive debating with examples following, and I call upon the Prime Minister to start a case of opening government here.
Am I audible? Panel, many thanks to the CA team for this motion, because I have never been prouder to propose. The reason is that at this very moment, I wear the t-shirt of my local debating society from a small city in Poland that exists only because people like me see these young schoolies as friends that can get to know the arts of debating because it is worth it, not because it brings money. And I think that I have never been prouder to propose the status quo, to defend the status quo in which many local debating societies all around the world function perfectly only because people feel obligation to their local community. And this is something that actually makes these societies function rather than the situation that the opposition has to defend, which is probably companies like Learning Leaders, Capestone becoming very popular, and not necessarily everyone supporting this, because obviously the commodification and commercialization of debating might happen as a huge process, but obviously it's not going to, like in one moment happen to the extent that it will take over the whole debating. I will have 2 points of my speech. The first one is that I'm going to address what should be the metric for how we see debating community as something beneficial. I think that that metric should be popularity and diversity as opposed to the quality of that debating. The second thing is that I'm going to explain why within that metric we believe that we're winning, why small institutions are less likely to live on, and only richer people, upper middle class people are going to access debating, thus making it less diverse. To the first, I think that the best strategy for the opposition in this round is to say that the quality of debating is going to be increased because of the financial side to that. And because of that, in the future, maybe we will have some sort of trickle down, like economics applied to debating. People will believe that debating is something really worth it, is going to make it to the mainstream. And in that way, many people are going to access that. Here are the reasons as to why what makes debating popular is not the quality of that, and the whole trickle down economics cannot work. First of all, we believe that quality is rather inaccessible metric. And the reason for that is that if I was to call my parents to this room and actually listen to that debate, they wouldn't know the difference between this debate and the final of European University Debating Championship. So many people, from their very nature, cannot access the stuff that we are doing here and cannot actually differentiate between what is the difference between the quality of that debate and the quality of many other debates. So even if money actually brings the quality much more up, it's probably something that that cannot be reflected in what people see and how people value debating, specifically because many people actually cannot understand what we are doing here. And even if people are extremely, educated and generally intelligent, it's still something that is quite relatively inaccessible, which means that quality to a vast majority of people doesn't matter that much. The flip side of that, something that we want to argue, is that what matters is the appearance of this activity as being diverse, as being popular, as something that is being beneficial, as something that is useful. And only if you have many people from different walks of life, both lawyers, businessmen, as well as people that are working in technical occupations, saying to their friends that debating has changed their life, that debating has been something meaningful, you can have this effect when people believe, oh, debating might be actually useful in my life too. Debating actually can be something worth promoting rather than an elitist thing that can be restricted to lawyers and so on and so forth. Note, panel, that most of the society recognize the value of public speaking skills or of debating as a whole, but they say it should be restricted to specific portions of the society rather than making it to the mainstream, which is something that we argue should happen on our side of the house. The second thing that I want to say is also how cohesive this community is something that matters, because at the moment, most of the competitive debating brings people from universities that have a lot of other things to do. So there is a huge alternative cost to being involved in debating. And at the moment when certain individuals are, for instance, vilified, as Dogsbridge Convenios were vilified because of the fact that they wanted to charge high reg fees, this means that these individuals are less likely to contribute to this whole community, and less likely, and we are as the whole, less likely to appear as cohesive as something that is worth being involved in. Thus, on our side of the house, we have more diverse, more cohesive debating communities that are increasing their popularity, and meaning that debating can get to the mainstream, while on their side of the house, they have a version of debating that is not appealing to anyone, specifically the people that are decisive when it comes to decisions such as introducing this in curricula and so on and so forth. Second point, Why it means that small institutions are less likely to live on and only richer people can access that? First of all, we believe that specifically initially, once you commercialize debating, you are targeting towards more financially viable places. So if you started debating social enterprise in Poland, you probably go to Warsaw rather than to my city, Białystok, because there are more people that can actually pay for that. The comparative is that obviously there are inequalities in debating right now, but these inequalities does not necessarily correlate with financial inequalities. So for instance, people at SOAS might be like relatively much more richer than people at, I don't know, like Warsaw, but probably Warsaw has better debating than SOAS, because it is not necessarily financial inequality that appears right now, but the inequality that is sort of naturally created by, like individuals, role models, and all of that, and we are absolutely fine with that. So specifically in the short term, less people are giving back to the communities that are small. Second of all, independent adjudicators probably want to go to Asian competitions right now that pay for them rather than Polish competitions or Belarusian competitions, Kazakhstani competitions. And the reason for that is that obviously this is never going to be a very, very huge it is never going to be a very, very huge compensation, but specifically for the people that involve in debating as independent adjudicators, money matters. Not many of these people are actually extremely rich. Many of these people want to have some pocket money, therefore they are going to make this choice in many cases. Third of all, people are not going to give back to their communities because there is an alternative cost to that. And specifically at the beginning, when you are starting your debating community and when you are becoming involved in your debating society, it takes time to actually, like develop these ties. Also, oftentimes these ties are being developed once you coach these people. And the first step is so much less likely if the alternative for you is to do an online, is to fly to Kazakhstan, for instance, and do a workshop in Astana. The last thing is that there is a huge pressure on individuals that are doing it for free, because they, like they're not necessarily, there will not be necessarily that many of them, which means that they're also much more strained and so on and so forth. What are the impacts of that? First of all, in the short term, many institutions die because what matters is institutional knowledge, single individuals that keep these institutions going. If one or two people change to, like doing stuff for money, these institutions are going to die, and it's going to be extremely hard to retrieve them because everyone will have that failure in mind, and that failure is something that actually is a huge barrier in small circuits. Second of all, debating changes lives regardless of the level. We think that the fact that people can become more open-minded is something worth in and of itself, and the more people access that, the better. The last thing is that the more open-minded our communities and circuits are, the better they are, because they are more inclusive, they reflect bigger diversity of the society, and for that reason they're also not as leftist and bigoted in a very leftist way as they are right now. Thank you very much.
I thank the Prime Minister for his speech and call upon the leader of opposition to start a case for a side opposition. Here.
Okay. Can you hear me? Great. Great. Okay, Honorable Speaker, in this speech I'm going to explain two main things. First of all, why we indeed do get better quality of debating, but also why this quality spreads further on a local level, and in second argument, why it internationalizes, and why we get less bigotry overall in international debating when we have this thing, all things like that. A few points on opening government. So opening government tries to claim that people have to feel obligation before their societies, and if this commercialization happens, it's not true anymore. You just work for money, not for your society. We don't understand in any way how those two things are mutually exclusive. For overwhelming most of the people, their societies are extremely important. There's an enormous amount of localism happening in debating societies, as all of your friends are usually debaters. All that you do for 24 hours of your life is debating with those people. You fall in love with people from your societies. You represent your societies in fights against other societies, and essentially having those money incentives, as in, for example, working in a small company or maybe having your own private practice, doesn't change this a little, even a bit. What changes is that instead of, for example, going and doing part-time job in a subway, or like doing part-time job as an English teacher in Kazakhstan, which I can do, I'll instead teach people debating when I want to get myself some income. And again, on this point of framing, it's not clear for us why we're only talking about companies such as learning leaders, but it's overwhelmingly when commercialization of debating happens, it usually comes from debaters themselves, like diners charging some kind of fees for whatever services that they want to provide, and etc., not for these commercial companies, etc. I'm going to explain in much further detail why essentially we're going to get this knowledge spread to everyone. But second thing that they say is that just generally quality doesn't matter because no one cares about debating that much outside of debating, and so how well you debate doesn't matter at all. Like honorable speaker, we believe that debating knowledge and debating skills do stretch to many other areas of your life, because in general, just when you work with people, you need to explain them stuff, you need to, in order to advance yourself in a career, you need to be very good at explaining things. And honestly, it's not enough for you to have this baseline understanding of debating. In order to do that, oftentimes you meet with other very smart people in order to have those things like in conversation. In order for you to outdo them, it's good for you to have good quality of stuff. It also helps you just in other extraneous things. I was a computer science student, now I'm a political science student. I switched easily because I know how to write arguments very well. It flexed my skills because of the fact that I have a good debating society. And I mean, obviously, it also helps you to spread good knowledge. Like debaters in Central Asia, for example, are almost all bloggers in their Instagrams, Twitters, or whatever else, where they explain to people why being conservative is not very good. And again, only if they build perfect, flawless arguments, only then people are going to believe them, because people are more prone to protect their beliefs instead of change them. I believe that's pretty important. All right, so why are we getting basically better debating all across the board, right? So the thing is that on framing, we have a ton of diners that have a ton of knowledge and experience. However, their skills are not being transferred because either they're tired and are interested to debate in same rooms for 20th time and they don't even come to competition, or B, they have like grown-up responsibilities, they have to work, they have a family, they have to cover their own expenses, etc. So they speak little, they judge even less, and they are hardly doing any workshops at all, right? And B, you have this localism in debating, which means that people still love their societies no matter what. You have nationalism when everyone from Central Asia tells us that we have to win this debate because we're cool, not only people from our society, etc. People still have a lot of this love remain, despite of the fact that CA of this literal competition runs his own like private practice of teaching people, and he still does that for free, and we also do that with my partner anyway. All right, so why knowledge spreads further? Well, we believe that realistically, prices for private training are not that high. Most people, virtually anyone, can afford that if they really want to, right? And a ton of people in those, and that's very important because a ton of people cannot afford, for example, to go to Oxford University to study there, to engage in their awesome debating in Oxford Debate Union, etc. But they can afford to buy whatever money is needed for Jason Zhao to train you, and therefore get amazing training from him instead of paying all of those very expensive fees that are usually needed for you to go to those institutionally better like societies, because a lot of other structural reasons that you just cannot change. Because of that, a lot of debaters from bad societies, well, not bad societies, smaller societies, etc., have an ability to afford themselves great training, and then because of the localities that they feel, they go to their own societies and spread this knowledge. They give workshop for their own novices, they play on practice rounds, and etc. They spread this knowledge further, right? But B, we believe that generally people who really want it and afford it, they do not have this knowledge stored in their locality, as in they do still go to open IVs, they still judge on open tournaments, and etc. And when they get this knowledge from those diners, this knowledge spreads through ripple effects, as in when you get smashed by someone who got a lot of training from Jason Zhao, sure, maybe it's unfair for you that you didn't get that training, but you have learned a ton of stuff from that, and you eventually can get better. And it's not true, again, for you that you cannot essentially rise up to the same level only because you don't get this training. Gaining this knowledge from debating with other people is very helpful for you, but there's a ton of online workshops and etc. things that you can join together with this, and therefore get good enough that you can debate basically against anyone. Why it's good is because that we inject new knowledge that is not possible for you to inject otherwise in society, because those diners otherwise will just have this knowledge in their brains and never tell it to anyone, right? I believe that it goes to smaller sites by far more than those bigger sites that already have a lot of cool speakers that trains them out of their locality feelings anyway, right? But on the second thing, and on internationalization, we believe that a ton of things happen once knowledge spreads across countries, and it's only possible oftentimes when you have a ton of money. Say, international adjudicators come to your tournament, that means that everyone gets obviously better judges, but also just people from poor countries, for example, cannot often come to your tournament and to make it better unless they get paid. Say Eastern European debaters cannot just afford to fly to Iona and freely like adjudicate people there and get them better, and also spread just knowledge about their states, give feedback on motions, make their country seem like less of a distant post-communist state, but as something that's more real and more acceptable. And this is something that betters the perception of their countries as well, and again, generally reduces those biases that happen in debating and therefore gets them better. But also poor states, they call in great CAs because they bribe them with amazing competitions and amazing opportunities. They come in, and there's a ton of effects again on the CAs sharing their knowledge with people in those local places. All of those things are absolutely great. They're not basically things that OG are talking about is not happening, and therefore very proud to propose.
I thank the leader of opposition for that speech and call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case of opening government. Hear, hear.
Am I audible? Cool. I'm going to go through two main questions that have come up already in the round and which I consider to be the most important in the round. First, on accessibility. Secondly, on better debating, particularly in certain parts of the world. Before that, I would like, in the words of the great philosopher Matija Pusnic, engage with the prolegomena, which is just the following, right? One piece of extraneous rebuttal, which takes our opening opposition out of the round. IA funding and covering expenses of people is not the commercialization of the society right now. What you guys have to defend is not covering expenses of people. It is to cover their expenses and then give them money on top of that. That is the key difference that has resulted as an extension of this. Because note, the info slide doesn't talk about IA salary or IA funding, i.e. bringing people to join and come CA or whatever the competition, just paying their expenses. It talks about salaries, which is like, look, we're not going to defend making you judges walk to go to Astana and pay for with your own money. Like if that's our burden, then fuck it, yeah, we're gonna lose this debate. Well, shit. No, I don't think that's what the round's about. I think based on that clarification, pretty much most of what opening opposition is out of the round. But I do think that a lot of their mechanisms are indeed applying to the reframing that they're going to necessarily have to do in the second speech, unless they want to prove to you that we have to, force people to pay for their own stuff. I want to note a couple of things in this debate. There are certain things and certain commercializations of the debating community that we just can't get rid of, right? So for example, covering the expenses of CAs and stuff, or as a result, having some type of reg fee in order to be able to cover that, or giving food to people, or having some institutions being more privileged than others, would exist anyways, right? Like Cambridge will always have some type of Deloitte sponsoring them. Probably true. But the key thing that has changed is the fact that on top of that, we create incentives, and that's the key difference, right? We pay people to come and do it on top of all that. What is the problem then on accessibility? First, I want to note that on everything they've said, like even if it is true that we are going to have to defend people not paying, not having their expenses paid when they go to judge in other countries, I would like to encourage you to take a moment and look at your screen. Yeah? Okay. I would like to take you a moment to look at your screen. You will see me and you will see a bunch of other people. I'm just going to pause it. Okay, good. I'm at 226. Okay. If you look at your screen, you're going to see me and a bunch of people. That's the beauty of the internet, which is something that we can get under either side of the house, which doesn't require physical presence, i.e. the workshop stuff they're talking about, which they themselves talked about online workshops, right, are pretty much not a case for them. So let's talk about accessibility. The first thing to note is that at some point, we're going to leave the quarantine. I think that right now you get things like paying on top of things because despite the fact that there are no expensive people for you to cover, you somehow have to make them, right? There's no experience for them to gain, i.e. they don't go to another country, etc. The problem with this is twofold. First, the kind of narrative that IA should be paid will still exist despite the fact that we're not all at home, which means that you will have to cover the expenses, but you will also have to pay them more money, right? Which means what? It means that you're going to get more reg fees, as you did at Doxbridge, right? I'm not vilifying the guys. I think what they did is awesome, and that as an EUDC Premcom was potentially a good idea to try and get the best pool ever. I just think that the way that they did it is probably not the best, or at the very least, that's what I have to argue in this speech. So I think that at the point at which you raise those reg fees, you get a couple of problems. First, the societies they talk about, which are able to organize tournaments while giving people the ability to stay in 5-star hotels and stuff, yeah, these are probably people that aren't impacted on either side of the house. Insofar as that luxury, etc., is going to be still supplied, the question is whether or not to pay them. Like, the small societies aren't impacted by this, right? The small society won't be able to pay people to come into their IV, right, in order to actually get the people to stay into the 5-star hotels in the first place. And it's the first time ever, after yesterday, actually, where I'm actually happy to have convened the tournament, because this is how the process works. First, you have to get a good CA team. Once you do that, you get a good IA pool because you get them through the CAs. And then, due to the two factors I've just mentioned, you get good teams which are attracted by CAs and IAs, right? Throughout the top, if you pay the CAs, then you have to pay the IAs in order to do that. That's a lot of cost for small societies. And I'm not talking about Kazakhstan. Like, these guys have beaten my ass like twice already in the tournament. I've only gotten the first against them, like a questionable one in round 2. The thing is, panel, that they did this because of the status quo, which wasn't paying people to go there, but rather outreach programs because of EUDC, because we recognize that there's some type of obligation to do this. And what they have to do is explain to us, why is it that at the point at which you further commercialize this community, you're gonna still get all those benefits? Because I'm not sure that this obligation will still exist. And they say this, they say, like the Kazakhstan society or whatever they're part of, like the NU, it's very nice. You fall in love with people, you like people, etc. Like, I don't know. Here's the thing. That sounds like a great society, but they have to deal with a trade-off, which is, do I go to train my society, for example, at Queen Mary? Or will I go and, for example, train, I don't know, another institution which is going to pay me money, right? I made that choice, and in hindsight, I made a bad choice when I decided to not attend Queen Mary and do things like DebateMate because it would make more money. Yes, look, this is something that results from a commercialization, and this is trade-offs that you're necessarily going to get because we're students, right? And I think that's important. Not everyone is MDG. Not everyone can give 10K to Malaria Foundation or whatever. Not everyone can pay reg fees forever. This is reflected society memberships, etc. At the point at which you realize that, it is very important to understand that most people need the time and the amount that they can get. Because no matter what you tell me, you saying that part-time English teaching is the same as CA competition regarding money, I don't know where you guys live. I just don't think that this is likely to happen. If it happens, then all our impacts are even more harmful because we're talking about more money. CO, something, anything?
How do you think without sponsorship we would be able to run walls considering the costs of the hotels, the flights, etc.?
But we're gonna still pay. No, whoa, 1 second here. You're not gonna come up and say that we can't get sponsorship on our side of the house. Like, the whole point of sponsorship is that you do it to cover the costs, right? And the reason why you cover the costs is because people need to live somewhere. The need to live somewhere, i.e. a hotel that is decent, is very distinct from living at the, I don't know, 5-star hotel that you guys want to get in the team in opposition, right? Like, sponsorship is an inevitable thing that happens already, right? I think that's just true, right? So I think that both the reg fees and the fact that institutions are like privileged already, you just cement their position. Because, for example, getting people to say the Cambridge IV for some money is always going to be more attractive than seeing the Queen Mary IV, right? These imbalance already exists. The fact that these institutions, due to the sponsorship that I'm proud of, are going to be able to even more, get more money to those CAs, get even better CAs, get even better IAs, get even better speakers. I know it happens already, panel. I think that the problem is that it's going to happen a whole lot more, and it's going to happen at the expense of people that aren't as privileged as they want us to believe. After all, you're judges too. I realize that you can't be too objective because that would mean you're getting paid right now. But, like, come on, you're watching me for free. What's more important than that? Come on.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. Thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech. And remind everyone to please just make sure that your mics are muted during our speeches. And call upon Member of Government to extend.
Hello, just testing my mic. Can I be heard properly? Okay, I'm going to start my speech now. Ladies and gentlemen, debating could have been more. It could have incorporated differing worldviews. It could have challenged us to imagine a debate world other than the Western liberal world, but it didn't. Instead, it has disenfranchised the majority of the debating world just to privilege the rich few countries. Closing government will make the not so radical claim that the commercialization of competitive debating is primarily responsible for the Western liberal bias that has excluded the real and developing world and has skewed our perception of what a good debater does and what a good debater is. I have 2 points of argumentation. One, why commercialization of competitive debating has institutionalized a debating worldview that is privileged and exclusionary. And secondly, on the comparative, why less privileged debaters are preemptively excluded at a very young age. Before this, a few points of rebuttal. The one issue I want to look at from opening opposition and the opening half in general is this issue of accessibility. And note the wording of the previous speaker. He noted that the problem that exists in the status quo is shallow debating, that there's a need for good debating for most of people and most societies in the developing world, or for most debaters rather. So I have a few contentious points. Firstly, even if it means that there are more tournaments, that there are more opportunities for those who learn and compete in debating, it does not change the standard of what a good debater is. This is more important than opening government because it's not just about debating being for everyone and being more and more accessible. It's not just about the absolute number of people debating, but it's about how debating gives you ideas, how you apply it in real life. It is about how it shapes your attitude, how you subconsciously think on what contexts are more persuasive, how you speak, and what accents you copy, or what arguments and context you prefer to use because you learn from the best, because you know this is the most persuasive context, this is the most intuitive context, and this is the thing that works in most judges because that's the intuition pump that people usually kind of get. But who's to say they are the best? Who's to say that it's legitimate that they should be the ones who are valued financially? Who's to say that they are the ones that are more in demand? It is history, it is capitalism, it is commercialization. This argument is contingent on learning being contingent in this specific manner of being a good and inclusive process that is consensus building. But it isn't like that in the status quo. It is always privileged towards those you pay, those you invite from the Western world to go to Asian tournaments and say that I can give you better personal comments. I can teach you what being a better debater like. I know what it's like to debate in worlds. I know what it's like to debate with most of these other privileged institutions. So you should follow me. So we will now deconstruct this notion by saying it is precisely this learning design, how this learning structure does more harm than good. So it's not just that minimum wage arguments need to be improved, but it is that we need to be more persuaded by arguments from the developing world that may say the minimum wage actually does more harm than good. And it's not just an issue of labor rights. It is an issue that it is incredibly difficult to implement in that nation. But what that Western judge will tell you is that, oh, that's the fiat of the motion. You have to be persuaded by these Western nations. That is the assumption you must accept. That is not what debating should be like. That is not the quality you have to accept. First argument, why commercialization of competitive debating has institutionalized the debating worldview that is privileged and exclusionary. What is the premise of this argument? Commercialization changes the primary stakeholders in debate. This is an exclusive premise because it changes those who shape the debate meta, those who write the WUDC judge manual, those who write the books from the past, those who appear on YouTube and on other competitions. They're the ones who teach us what debating should be. They are the messiahs of debate. They are the gods of debate that we always refer to, those we refer to in memes and always say that they're the best ones in debate that we should always copy, who go to Asia and represent those institutions because they otherwise couldn't have done so if they were not paid. And it is their lives we follow from. And the only way we try to challenge this notion is actually opposite the commercialization that is happening now. It is only when smaller institutions sometimes reject this notion, sometimes don't look at what Western judges think or what other richer judges think, because you say that it is better to focus on what our conservative views are. And yes, sometimes it's conservative. Yes, sometimes it might be more moderate, but at least it might be more real to their context. And I think that's more valuable for that circuit particularly, which we say, is a more intuitive context. It's not what likelihood should mean. It's not what more persuasiveness should mean. It shouldn't be defined by this specific sect of people, like what OO says, who are the initial rich people who shaped what debating is and what it can continue to be. It's people who have been historically privileged, that have had the benefit to brag about debating across the world by being paid by these privileged institutions nations, or those who had the privilege to actually talk about communism because it's a far left thing that only rich kids can talk about, because actually it's devoid of the real life experiences of actually real developing countries that are experiencing the worst harms of these same statuses. I think these are arguments that somehow get so much bias, that get so much privilege, but somehow became the norm of debating today. And I would say that's directly because of commercialization. And it is significantly because of this that developing nations in our context are so significantly excluded. It skews this discussion. It changes the quality of debating. It affects how you think about the poor. It creates this messiah complex of individuals who are dominating the debate circuit and who will continue to do so because they'll also be the ones to win more and more competition. Sometimes, yeah, you are sometimes inclusive towards the random Asian kid that gets better and better and somehow makes a final in an international competition. But even in that instance, that person still has to adapt to your norms because he is the minority. He is the one that might rarely break in worlds and never probably get that. I think that in itself creates the in groups and out groups in that own debating circuit that makes debate more exclusionary within developing countries and makes them more and more difficult, especially when they feel pressured to also adapt. I'll take a POI from closing.
Yeah, to a large extent, the entirety of the analysis is rather symmetrical. We think that under both sides of the debate, like debaters from Iona, such as Harish or whatever, would still be considered as more prestigious, regardless of how much money they take for their work.
Okay, so here's the comparative. The comparative in our model is that you probably will not do it for profit. You probably will have less significant tournaments out there. Debating might be somehow less important in many of these circuits. You might have English teachers in your local circuit that probably don't know about these Western debaters, but the standard is much, much, much less significant. It is much, much, much more reduced. And we think that it is comparatively better even in these smaller, concentrated local circuits that might take a long time to evolve, but at least they don't evolve to the standard of what everyone else says should be the standard, of what commercialized debating tells you what the standard should be. I made this direct link that it is commercialization that creates this debating understanding process that shapes what our worldviews of debate should be and what it could be, and therefore it shapes how education and teaching becomes. It shapes your curricula. It shapes what our institutions formalize our process are. It shapes how you create your debating organization. I think inside these developing countries, or even across any moderate debating institution, that bias exists. I am very proud to propose.
I thank the member of comment for that speech and call upon member for opposition to extend.
Just a second. Wait, so far? Can you all hear me properly? Great. So we think inside opposition, the debate is not just a game. We think the debate is really important for people to improve their life, to make discussion between people much better, much more quality, to reduce biases against genders and races and things like that, and to make the discussion more intelligent. We think that in order for that, we want more quality debate and more existence of it around the world, especially in weak debate clubs, and we accept that metrics. But notice that none of the debates until now, no one was comparative and actually explained what exclusively to this to the payment and to the commercial. I'm going to explain to you exactly this comparative, how it changes the weak debate clubs and how we get first more quality of debate in these places, secondly more accessibility of debate to these places. But before I do that, one point of rebuttal. We got from CG in the case that the ones who save the debate, the ones who are on the top in our side are only Western privileged and therefore it is bad. So we agree that they are the gods of debate, but there are a lot of problems with this case. First of all, it's just not comparative. We think that in both sides, there are still gods, they're still the winners of awards in Euros, they're still the ones that have more, their speeches in YouTube, and they have their prestige and do the free workshops in YouTube. They are the same person. Therefore, we think it's just symmetric. And the only answer we got from that in the POI is that, okay, but now they will do less debate because they won't have these people. I think it's just fail their own metric that they want more debate in these developing countries. But moreover, we think that even these people started debating as a hobby, didn't get money for most of their debating years. Therefore, they are committed to the ideas of debate. They are committed to the quality, to stop the biases, to make it intelligent and logic discussions. Therefore, we don't think they are just privileged ones that are just going to talk about Western problems. Now, moving to my argument. We got some opening opposition that no one will leave the job and we prefer the local communities. But they have no analysis about about what is the comparative here between volunteers and money. Let's look at the comparative here. We think that, first of all, it's the place of taking part. We still think that they are debaters that are really committed to debate, really love debate, and they want to influence the world in debating. We think the comparative here is where they do it. When you volunteer and don't get money for that, you'll most likely go to places like Oxford IV and not places like India or Africa. Why is it true? First of all, because it has the prestige. I prefer being in Oxford IV if it's for free and not to go to India to some shitty place. Secondly, we think that just it push you forward in your debate career. If I was a judge and I broke in Oxford IV, it's much more prestige for me than if I broke in some competition that nobody knows about anything. Thirdly, we just think that it's just people prefer being in places like Europe and England. It's better travel for them. It's closer to their home if the top debaters are, like CG saying, from these privileged countries. And therefore, they're just unlikely to go to this weak debate club. We think that if they get money, if they are getting paid to go to these places, this is exactly what they have the incentive to actually go to these places. They get money from that. They can do this type of job. They can push forward their career without stopping their real life. And this is exactly the comparative where they can actually do it. Secondly, we think that secondly, we think that just secondly, we think why we think so we get now more of these debaters in this week debate clubs. And why do we think it's really important? Why we care about quality so much? Opening government only saying that no people can notice the difference, therefore quality is not important. But look, it's not the criteria for good debate. We think that we want debate to teach people, and even opening government saying that they want people to be more open-minded. We think that to get this quality, it's not like opening opposition only saying rhetoric question. I will analyze why quality is really important. First of all, because now we understand the other side more carefully. We think specifically nowadays, where the media has the algorithms that show me only my opinions and people that think only like me. When everybody's going to camp, I'm on this side and they're on the other side. We think that it's specifically that understanding the other side, know how to analyze its logic, its professionality, that is really important. Secondly, we get more role models that now will take more people to go to debate. And thirdly, we think there are now much less biases now, because now people know how to analyze logic and not only their style, their accent, and their gender, like most of people do without knowing logic and debate for yourself. We think, and second of all, we think that it's much more accessible to the debate at all in our side. Because of that. First of all, we think the debate is really expensive. We think you need to pay for competitions, for rent, for flights, for hotels, for food, tons of things you need to pay for. We think that only in our side, we actually can get good sponsorships. We think that who cares enough to be a sponsor? We think that ones who that debate, that it's one that can actually work with debaters, that actually needs them as clients, as workers, most likely pay and sponsor people from around the world and pay a lot of money for them to actually be there. We think that when you want to get students, when you got to get advertisement inside the debate community, when you want teachers in your club, when you teach students in school, this is exactly where you want to sponsor debate competitions. Before I continue, OG.
People already, without debates being commercialized, competitive debates being commercialized, understand the value of knowing logic. It is the marginal change that they don't notice, and therefore the quality is not going to increase how debate is popular.
We don't think that people that understand notice, because as Prime Minister said himself, his parents can differentiate whether it's a good debate or not a good debate. Therefore, people don't understand logic otherwise they would understand if debate is good or not. So we say that it's much more likely that we get more sponsorships in our side when there are people who get money. We think that if they don't get money for that school, for that teaching debate, for these lectures about debating companies, they won't have the money to sponsor competitions, and they wouldn't be able to do it in the first place. Second, we think that we get more classes abroad. We think that when now you can actually get paid for teaching debate in third world countries, when you can do it, when you can get money for doing workshops about debating in logics in companies around the world. This is exactly where you are able to do so. We are able to go around the world, and this is only on our side. So we prove to you that in the comparative, we have more debate in the weak debate clubs, which is more quality with more accessibility. So for all of these reasons, please oppose.
I thank the member for opposition for that speech and call upon government whip to summarize the case for your side here.
Hello, am I audible? All right, wonderful. Okay. Okay. I'm going to look at two things in this speech. One, access, but two, I want to question this entire benefit at off-bench of quote-unquote good debating. But I want to first point out two incredibly unfair things that closing opposition does. Number one, they say, well, we're just not going to have tournaments anymore. You need sponsorships to run them, etc., etc. The first thing I want to point out here is that a lot of the costs you talk about are precisely because of commercialization, i.e. you need sponsorship to be able to pay your IA's high fees. I.e., your primarily wealthy base of people going to your competition expect really nice hotels, expect really nice like venue, etc., and therefore increase the cost that could have otherwise happened. I'd agree, we probably lower a lot of the quality of these things like tournament and amenities on our side, etc. But if it means it becomes more accessible as a public speaking and debating platform, that's obviously a preferable benefit on our side. Secondly, they say, well, a lot of this inequality that Luigi at MG talks about is simply symmetric. The first thing I want to point out here is that the answer to inequality isn't let us institutionalize it, exacerbate it, and make sure its worst effects are felt, which is precisely what opposition bench here does. I would agree, it's far from perfect, but in all other hobbies and sports, there is some degree of things like your natural intelligence, some degree of things like your maybe hard work and ability to put these things in and the talents that you were born with, that I'd say, well, probably not perfect, are at least far fairer than the standards of wealth that they are going to have then, and are far more likely to be distributed randomly, at least, I think is still fair, amongst the population then. So, even, and here's what I want to talk about all this stuff about why it's still going to be incredibly unfair and remove all the access. That's the first issue. So, the absolute best case of opening opposition is to say, well, this trickles down in the future. What I'm going to do now is say that it'll never trickle down for many reasons. Number one, the biggest tragedy of a underprivileged debater is the tragedy of low expectations, i.e., it is you seeing a lot of your peers getting private training, you seeing your peers go through endless workshops, going to expensive tournaments and getting much more experience than you, that tell you, is this even a worthwhile hobby? Because even if you improve incrementally and work on yourself, if a lot of your peers have access to things that you never had access to before, will win competitions, will crush you in debate rounds, then what's the point of trying? Maybe I should try MUN. So I think that's precisely what removes a lot of the access, not just the initial cost, but the lack of expectation to feel like there's a worthy cost to be able to enter then on opposition. Secondly, if you do want to improve, every additional point of improvement comes into sinking your pockets, i.e. going to more competition, i.e. wanting to improve. So even if you are initially interested then on their side, you feel like you lose relevance over time because the things you don't have access to come at the cost of your own improvement and progression as a debater. But lastly, a lot of the initial barriers to debate, i.e. individuals in developing countries, and the cultures that are formed, which recognize debate as something that is for rich people, are the reasons why parents are simply not going to let you enter these things. Are the reasons why you feel so excluded, because there aren't other people like you at these competitions, and therefore you don't feel like you belong. You don't feel like these socials make sense, and therefore a lot of the points of access are not just the initial cost that I think that OG kind of argues about, but a lot of the time the cultural cost, motivation.
Sorry for the interruption.
From CEO. CEO? Hello, CEO? Okay.
The thing about sponsorship is, since in order for you to have the incentive to do things such as the LSE Open of the learning leaders, you need to have the financial incentive to recruit workers and to publish yourself to future schoolies.
All right, so I'll talk about that. So is it impossible to have debate competitions now? I'd say there are many incentives to be able to do that. Number one, you want to put your debate society in like the spotlight. You want to be able to attract attention for them and hope to be able to get future investment. Number two, you want to be able to ensure that the place they're visiting and a lot of the people who are passionate about debating are able to give back and contribute. Number three, a lot of the time these are integrated with schools who want to be able to promote the debate programs and don't do them at a cost, but rather to be able to improve the school facilities and programs. So I think all of these proves that it's possible. We've been running so many online tournaments with little to no cost. I think that's a fantastic thing. We should continue this trend rather than go back to really expensive auctions and other majors. So what these all prove is that a lot of the problems with access to debating are not just inherent. There are problems with the commercialization of debating, and therefore you cut off a lot of people from being able to access this in the first place. That's important. The second issue, and again, not essentially exclusive as TG, when my partner talked about the exclusive, incredibly good debaters club that is created then. So here's where we want to talk about where do we get better debating, and this question is actually falsely labeled because I want to question what good debating is at all. Here's where I weigh on the clash about access and quality. I think debating could have been different. We could have been engaging with lesser privileged debaters in socials and after rounds. We could have allowed greater access for not so rich individuals to be great. And OO says, well, if you invite some of these people to some of these countries, some of the underprivileged individuals might be great. So I want you to look at the nature of debating as a competitive sport as relative in terms of the talent that is necessary for you to be able to succeed. There are limited slots. There are limited people who can make motions, who can make lectures on the debate and shape what the debate meta is, who can shape what is important and debate values are. I point out then that when you limit this to individuals who can rise to the top by being able to pay for training, and be able to contact rich friends to partner with them, is precisely these opportunities where you can shape what debating is about and uniquely go to more privileged individuals because they can be quote unquote more skilled than everybody else. So it's even the topics you talk about in debate, the ways we prioritize debates, or what context we view to be quote unquote lightly in debate is incredibly shaped by Western and incredibly privileged notions of who these people are. At best, they say you'll enter some other countries. If it is touching the already westernized elites of those countries in a lot of different developing countries, I'm not sure why that's much of an increased benefit then. So I want to ask you a very simple question. Why am I a Zoom call on a Sunday night and not eating dinner? It is because debating uniquely isn't just about participating, winning competitions, and improving, but it is about how it shapes your world uniquely and your ability to engage with other individuals. To the degree, you have an incredibly privileged understanding of what things like poverty and what the developing context is like, because these people don't join competitions. These people don't shape motions. These people have the ability to talk about debating because they have the same clout that other people do. That it is much harder for you to be able to understand and apply these kinds of skills in the real world. And if at best, you understand that a lot of rich people are still going to be massively successful, still going to be massively influential, at least the ways in which they can exercise their influence are with the understanding of how underprivileged debaters can talk about their causes, can talk about and engage them in rounds, socials, talk about what their country's context is like, but on your side, you're slowly choking them out because they're low and no longer becoming relevant, because the tragedy of low expectations that I've explained, and the increasing difficulty for us to make sure that the debate actually reflects real world struggles rather than how rich and liberal individuals perceive this world to be. I am incredibly proud to host.
I thank the commentator for that speech and call on opposition whip to conclude this final as a whole. Here.
Am I audible? Can you hear me well? 3, 2, 1, go. I'm going to whip it in the reverse order from what you are probably used to hear from whips. I'm going to start by weighing as compared to OO, then reply to OG, and lastly reply to CG. Let's start by comparing us to opening opposition, first by emphasizing the extensions from Lior that in fact got very few to no rebuttal whatsoever, right? We think we got two unique extensions from Lior. First, on the main clash that actually was of interest to Top Half, because Top Half discussed a lot of the issue about where do we have more ability of social mobility between societies, right? When OG argue, look, Oxford can pay so much more for judges than Kazakhstan. However, OO reply, but note, people like Jason Xiao will only volunteer in Oxford and Harish will only volunteer in Cambridge, but they will be willing for the money to come to another country, right? What is the problem that we have at this point in the debate? While we definitely agree with OO and we think that they are winning on what they are arguing, the main thing that is missing here is the comparative, because note, both arguments are true, right? Oxford can afford itself to pay more, but also it has probably more volunteers, right? And we don't get from any Top Half team any clear comparison of what is more accessible for the small or underdeveloped societies, right? In fact, to be clearer, at no point, the actual point coming from the already prime minister that says, but it doesn't matter if Kazakhstan can pay because Oxford can pay more and they have this opportunity cost, so they will choose Oxford. At no point do we get a meaningful response to that from opening opposition. What is Lior's actual extension here and why does it help us break down this clash? Lior actually gives you the comparative analysis as to why money is much more accessible than volunteers to the small societies. In particular, what Lior proves here is the fact that your ability to pay more money as an established place and your willingness to pay more money as an established institution is much smaller than your relation to volunteers. Note the fact that Oxford IV is very famous for how cheap they are in paying IAs, whereas many big tournaments in Asia are very famous for paying a lot for IAs, right? Why is this the case? Because specifically, volunteers are not as mobile as money. Because specifically, Oxford doesn't have the incentive to pay more for IAs because it has so many talented judges that are local, so it can afford itself to pay shit, meaning that it gives more incentive for people such as Harish, such as Jason Xiao, etc., to actually move and judge in places that are willing and able to pay more. This is where Lior uniquely actually breaks down this comparison. But in a non-contingent manner on that, Lior also has a second unique extension that was not at all brought up on Top Half up until like the literally last 15 seconds of DLO where they don't actually analyze any of it. And specifically what is missing here, because note here the response that I got from DPM to the POI we gave them, right? They say sponsorship isn't impacted by the debate, right? Because under both sides, you still have societies wanting to fund generally competitions, etc. This is also connected to the rebuttal we just got from the whip of the government saying, but look, societies already have an incentive to fund tournaments for their own prestige, etc. What Lior uniquely brings to the table, and this is the idea of specifically how sponsorships work nowadays. Most of the funding for internationals, such as EUDC or WUDC, etc., does not in fact come from the societies themselves, but rather from extraneous factors. Note the fact that every EUDC or WUDC was funded by local organizations that are associated with debating. Note how LSE this year was funded by learning leaders. Why is this bigger and more important than what we already got from opening opposition? And why is it unique to our side? First, because this is not to have anything to do with the goodwill of people. And this is why it is much more likely. Because what happens on both sides of the debate is IAs wanting to give back to their society, right? Like the lovely panel that we have here on this final have come here because you guys care about the debating society as a whole. You have friends here and you really care, right? You know who doesn't care that much? Learning leaders. Every sort of like private organization that actually funds these things, right? The only incentive that they actually have to give sponsorship is uniquely the money, right? Their ability to A, be more famous for future people who are willing to pay for them, and B, their ability to get future workers and employees, right? They are unique to our side. This is a much bigger impact because unlike Top Half, which is kind of a wash because on both sides you have a lot of incentives to volunteer, the only incentive that is actually unique for financial incentive is the external sponsorship that is not from within the debating community, but from without it. The second reason why it is logical ideologically prior or much more important is, since everyone in this debate cares about accessibility more than anything else, the prior demand for accessibility is to actually have the feasibility of debating. And here I want to also answer what we got from the government whip right now, because they tell us, but it isn't inherently expensive, right? It is just because we are accustomed to paying a lot of salaries to IAs. Note, we all analyzed things that are inherent and have nothing to do with IA sponsorship. Paying for flights to Thailand is fucking expensive. Paying for a hostel costs money, even if it is not the most expensive hostel out there, right? Paying for food for 10 days is expensive. All of these things are, regardless of our good intentions or will to give back to the community, things that we need to fund. I'd like to take opening now.
I might agree that on your side of the house, there is a bigger incentive for people like Harish to go to Asian competitions, but these Asian competitions need to be organized in the first place. How can you do that if the societies, many societies on your side of the house are dead because certain individuals just migrated to places where money is existent?
So most individuals, we think, don't actually migrate, and this is a very small impact in the debate, because aside from being debaters, most of us also have a life, and we have a family here and a job and many things. So most of us don't actually leave the country just because of, what is the more established institution, right? So we don't think this is a big impact in this debate. But specifically, let's actually engage with OG's analysis here, right? Because OG basically give us only two rationales, and please go over your notes. They never prove why there's less voluntarism under their side. What they do give us is two rationales for why we have less accessibility. The first is the entrance barrier, right? The idea of you cannot afford paying for debate. But note, most of us haven't paid more than a symbolic amount for actually debating. We paid for worlds. We paid for euros. We don't pay for just practicing debating. There's no entrance barrier here. The incentive, however, for institutions to have many practices and to actually attract people for free is in order for them to send to future internationals such as Worlds, making it the more important impact in this debate. Beg you to oppose.
I thank the opposition whip for that speech and everyone for the final. So I guess a round of applause in some shape or form that we can do here for everyone in the round. Well done. And I suppose we will be moved to a breakout room for judging, and we'll be back with you for announcements later.